be talking about interpersonal resilience skills and how those relationships are important. The reason I think it was so important is I see how we're all working together as a team to accomplish these goals that are set forth. So I'm going to look at this in two different ways. One is going to be how are we working together as a team and protecting those interpersonal relationships. And then also thinking about our home lives. Now that we have been in our house 4 months with the same people, there's probably been some conflicts that have come up, just because that happens when you spend close quarters together with people. You love them dearly, but you still have that conflict that happens. And so we're going to work through that today. So our resilience tip is going to be on interpersonal communication. When you think of intrapersonal, it's kind of dealing with yourself. Interpersonal means it's with someone else. So let's start by looking at the egg. So a lot of this may look familiar to you because I presented this in person a few years ago, but I felt it really important to go through this skill again. If you think about an egg, it has an outer shell that's hard and protective. And what is it protecting? It's protecting that softer, squishy part in the middle, which is the egg white and the egg yolk. Well, when you think about the yolk, the center part of that egg, that is probably your most sensitive part of you, your feelings, how you're handling, how you process through challenges. It is that part that outer covering is protecting the most, because not only does it have the hard shell, it has the egg white around it. That's also another layer to protect. So when someone starts to get at our yolk, which is our feeling, we oftentimes can feel a little uncertain. We feel emotional. We're not quite sure how to think through that rationally or logically, because we're all about our feelings. So what we want to do with our resilience skill is find ways to continue to protect our yolk with our shell, so that we don't end up cracked and fractured and kind of scrambled in a place that we don't want to be. So let's take a moment. I want you to think about this for a moment. Think about a time or a situation in the last few days where something didn't go well for you or as expected. And I want you to think about that in terms of an interaction with another person or a group, okay? Just kind of think about it. Do you think that your response was productive? Did you receive the results that you hoped for from that interaction? Did your response honor the relationship with that person or the connection that you have with that person? And would you respond the same way the next time? So just take a couple of seconds, kind of process that a little bit. Some of you might have had somebody that jumped in mind right away. You may still have a situation that feels a little unresolved that you're wanting to kind of continue processing through. This would be a great moment to think about. It could have to do with a significant other, a child, a friend, a coworker. So those are all things I want you to kind of keep in your mind as we're moving forward. Okay, so let's build that skill. What is our goal of interpersonal problem solving? Some of you might call this conflict resolution. It is to allow you to confront challenges in a manner that respect the relationship. I was at a local grocery store yesterday, and I was getting a balloon for a friend of mine who has a birthday. And I was at their little floral department waiting for her to tie the ribbon on my balloon. And a customer approaches her just screaming at the customer service agent because she wasn't helping her son fast enough. Obviously, there was no relationship there in that interaction. This person didn't know her. She was a stranger, I will assume. But I feel like thinking about that conflict that I witnessed yesterday, there was obviously no relationship that was important to that customer and the way in which she approached her. It also made me wonder how she approaches people who she does have a relationship with and a connection, because when the first few words out of her mouth were curse words, it was quite shocking to see that experience happen. And so I kind of took a step back as I got in my car and reflected on that moment to think, Okay, so the relationship wasn't important. She obviously probably had something else going on in her life that was creating maybe the stressful situation and how she was approaching that customer service agent. And then I also kind of wondered about her resilience skill a great deal. You know, does she have the ability to kind of work through those problems? So just thinking about when we confront challenges, are we different with different people depending on how we connect with them and what our relationship looks like? Another goal of interpersonal problem solving is lowering the intensity. You know, sometimes when we go into a conversation that's very emotion filled, we are so emotional that we're intense in our words and we don't think through what we say, and those can be hurtful phrases. So our goal is, how do we work through that and lower that intensity? And then of course is to find a resolution so that all parties can agree on things. So one thing we have to think about when it comes to conflict is, and this information isn't on the slide, but I wanted to give you just a little bit, is we have to think of constructive versus destructive conflict. Constructive conflict is managed, it leads to a solution. Destructive conflict kind of creates barriers, it destroys your morale, or again, your relationship, and it really kind of diverts energy away from what's really at hand and what's important. Because a lot of times what happens in destructive conflict is both parties end up walking away from that conversation very wounded because they've said something that was hurtful or harmful to that relationship. So how do we work through the problems in a more constructive way? We have to define the problem. A lot of times defining the problem, it's very helpful to use I statements and being specific about, I am disappointed that you forgot to take out the garbage. Very simple example, but using I statements are important. You know, asking the other person's perspective. Maybe you just see it completely different ways. Perhaps you see it one way and they see it completely opposite. I think I might have used this example last week of, you think the other person expects you to cook dinner every night, but you've actually never asked the question about what their expectations are. So your perspectives may be very different. Oftentimes, if you're the outside observer, you are going to see different clues than if you're in the middle of it. Don't we talk about this a lot in our training that we do with staff, is if you step back and observe, you might be able to see the picture a little bit more clearly. You want to work together to generate solutions. We would all love to have everything the way that we want it, right? We always want to come out with the least amount of stress and things working out in our favor. When we work to generate the solutions together, that allows both parties to have a little bit more of a happier solution. If we are able to see their perspective, then that also helps us to generate those solutions collaboratively. We want to evaluate solutions. So that means, is it realistic? Can we achieve that together? Is it a goal that's realistic? And is it fair? Evaluating the solutions is not judging the other person's ideas. So we have to be very clear in making sure that we're thinking about it in ways of, can we accomplish this goal together? And is it something that both people can do successfully? A few weeks ago, my husband did a detox where he was like on a liquid diet for a couple of days. And so I did it with him for a couple of days, and we were kind of both cleansing. And it was one of those things where he said he was going to do it for a week. And I said, I can't do it for an entire week, but I'll give you 2 days. And so we were able to kind of compromise and work through that. So thinking about different moments to where you can meet in the middle. And then choose a solution that is, that's good for you and act on it. I think sometimes when we get to this stage of, you know, finding the solution is actually following through and acting on it and doing what it is that you've said you're going to do. So you may not be able to come up with the solution right away. Maybe you need to take a break and have an opportunity to kind of process through that. But these steps are really important in helping each of you kind of, again, meet in the middle and doing that interpersonal problem solving. Some words of caution. Remember we talked about cognitive traps a few weeks ago? One to be very mindful of whenever you're doing interpersonal problem solving is mind reading. Don't just assume you know what they are thinking. ask them what they're thinking. Ask that person what they're thinking, what's on their mind. Avoidance is another thing to caution. Oh, it'll be fine. It'll just go away. We're not going to worry about it. I'll just take a deep breath and I'll move on because this will be fine. Somebody will eventually get up off the couch and take the trash out to the curb. You know, it's kind of like those silent standoffs that you have in your house, like you're just waiting to see who's going to do it. Or perhaps that happens in the work environment because a couple of you have the same task. Maybe you're just going to wait and see if the other person will take care of it, and then you don't have to. So we want to avoid being avoidant. Competing or forcing, trying to be so forceful in your point of view that they just cave. I think that's one of the things we have to be really aware of in interpersonal problem solving. Some of us have more assertive personalities, and some of us have more passive personalities. And so when it comes to this conflict resolution, know who you are, but remember to speak up for yourself in a respectful way. And then trivialization means just minimizing it. If it's a big deal to the other person that's in this relationship with you, then it should be a big deal to you as well. You don't want to make it trivial just because you think it's less important. So those are some things to be careful of as you're working through these conflicts. Few tips: be a good listener. You know, listen for the message, not to listen to hear what you want to hear, or not to listen to just be ready with your response. I had a situation once in my life where I was talking with somebody about parenting, and they were someone I had a close relationship with. We were talking about parenting, and I was giving some advice, and that individual said to me, "How long have you been waiting to tell me that?" It was almost like I had it locked and loaded and ready for the time that I was going to get to say it. And so I wasn't really being a good listener in that situation, because that person was absolutely right. I was just waiting for the moment to be able to give them that feedback. Be constructive and not destructive in your interactions, like we talked about. Gauge your mood. If you're not in a good place, don't have the conversation. You just wait until the timing is right, when you're more calm and at your best self. Pick the right time and a place to have a conversation. If you are standing in the kitchen and you're trying to fix dinner and the kids are screaming, probably not the best time to have a conversation. If you are in the middle of a meeting at work and there's other people around, perhaps you need to wait and schedule a separate meeting so that you can have that conversation, so it's not becoming this public thing. And then just remember to build optimism. You know, even though the times are difficult and we find things that are hard, you can find the positive in almost anything. So remember to try to take those moments to build that optimism, and genuinely just say thank you to the person for taking the time to talk through it with you. I think that's one of those steps that is also very important. All right, so we're going to go back to our reflection moment. Knowing what you know now, after we've kind of reviewed through the steps and talked about destructive versus constructive feedback, we've talked about the cognitive traps and being aware of those things. If you think back on that situation from a few days ago that came to your mind, and you're most interested in protecting the relationship, do you now feel that your response was productive? Did you receive the results that you'd hoped for? Did your response honor that relationship or that connection? And would you respond the same way next time? And many times when I've asked myself these questions, the answer is, no, it wasn't productive. No, I didn't get the results that I'd hoped for. No, it really didn't honor the relationship. And no, or yes, I would respond differently the next time. And as I've said many times with this, week after week, it always feels very reflective. We think back on something we did that wasn't successful and figuring out a way to stop and move forward in the future. So that's what I'm hoping for, that these skills can really help build that. So when we're looking at interpersonal problem solving, the one thing that's the most important when you're experiencing those conflicts or you're experiencing those challenges is that you have to always remember the person is the most important, and that is in the middle and the heart of this.